Aircraft may fly thousands of kilometers around the globe. Elon Musk intends to put people on Mars within the next few years after putting men on the moon with the help of rockets. We have reduced the size of the Earth, making it simple to ignore some of the neglected areas. For instance, airplanes fly over the skies almost constantly all around the planet. However, if you were to view a live global aviation traffic map now and pan to Asia, you would see nothing over this enormous region of the continent. No matter what you do, it always seems like all of the world's airplanes are simply avoiding this vast space and making an effort to fly around it, as if it were a prohibited place to travel over or fly through, even though this isn't the middle of the ocean. This vast region of land sits right over Asia, the continent with the highest population. Then why is this occurring? There are several causes, but before we discuss them, you need be aware of the region's aviation history. Subscribe to AWZ so you can watch the videos we have ready for you in the future. The Tibetan Plateau is where the dead zone in issue is located, and it is the third largest wasteland in the globe after Antarctica and northern Greenland. The Tibetan Plateau is the least hospitable region in the world for people to dwell and is also the least populated. It encompasses 7 nations and is more than 5 times larger than France, but only has a population of just over 14 million. The Tibetan Plateau is the world's highest geographic region, with an average elevation of nearly 4,500 meters, giving it the moniker the top of the world and explaining why so few people call it home. The moniker is appropriate given that the world's roof has long been one of the major barriers to flying. During the Second World War, when the Allies in what was then British India wanted to airlift supplies into China to help them in their struggle against the Japanese, the first significant attempt to fly across the plateau was made. The path was only a little over 840 kilometers from eastern India to Kunming in China, so it wasn't particularly long. Nevertheless, the pilots encountered incredibly intense turbulence since they were passing over the far mountains and towering steppes of the Tibetan Plateau. Winds up to 200 miles per hour and temperatures low enough to cause their fuel to freeze. Considering unpredictable weather conditions and a lack of emergency airports to divert to in the case of a disaster, let alone the sporadic involvement of Japanese fighters. All of these dangers combined to create an exceedingly hazardous flying path, which resulted in the loss of 594 aircraft and 1,659 soldiers who perished in the mountains over the course of 42 months. The majority of these losses were caused by the pilot's exposure to hazardous conditions, not by enemy action in most cases. In some months, up to 50% of all Allied aircraft that flew the route were crashing, which is obviously not exactly an acceptable loss rate for a modern airliner today. For comparison, the number of lives lost by the Allied air crews here was even higher than during the entire Battle of Britain against the Germans. Fortunately, the Tibetan Plateau has been gradually opened up in the decades following World War II. The current airport in the Tibetan capital of Lhasa was constructed in 1965, 10 years after the construction of the first airport in Chinese Tibet. Lhasa and Jining, 2 important international airports, are situated on the Tibetan Plateau today. These 2 airports are largely used for domestic flights within China. However, Jining still operates flights to Taipei, Tokyo, and Kuala Lumpur, whereas Lhasa only offers 1 foreign trip each week to Kathmandu. Therefore, it is accurate to say that in recent times, planes occasionally fly over the Tibetan Plateau. However, virtually all international flights between Eastern Asia and the West will make every effort to avoid passing over it. So now that we've gone through some history lessons, let's take a look at a few examples, like this flight, or just this flight. Despite having access to modern international airports and being able to fly over mountains, why do the majority of airplanes still avoid traveling over Tibet on longer flights? There are 4 main explanations that we'll go over. First is the absurdly high risk that arises in emergency situations. Consider it in this way. The Tibetan Plateau has an average elevation of well over 14,000 feet, and airplanes typically fly at altitudes of above 30,000 feet. Normally not an issue, but in extremely serious emergency situations, such as an engine failure or cabin depressurization, airline regulation requires descent to 10,000 feet. If the cabin depressurizes, the aircraft will release oxygen masks for the passengers to use. However, the supply is scarce, usually lasting barely 20 minutes. This amount of time is designed to allow passengers to continue breathing while the aircraft descends to a level of 10,000 feet, where they can resume normal breathing conditions. Now, obviously, nowhere over the enormous Tibetan Plateau is this feasible. The average elevation is almost 14,000 feet, therefore if a jet descended to 10,000 feet as required by procedure, that would be more than 5 times the area of France. If a cabin depressurization occurs above Tibet, it would very definitely crash into the side of a mountain and everyone would perish. Lhasa, Kathmandu, Chengdu, Uruk, and Almaty are the only neighboring major international airports that are secure enough and close enough for most large aircraft to divert to in an emergency. The majority of these airports circle the barren plateau, hundreds or thousands of kilometers apart from one another. For instance, if a jet is flying from Kathmandu to Lhasa, both cities serve as the alternate emergency airport as well as the final destination. A window on an Sichuan Airlines airplane that was crossing the plateau from Chongqing to Lhasa in 2018 blew out, leading to a depressurization catastrophe. Within 35 minutes of the depressurization occurring, because to the pilot's proximity to the plateau, they were able to immediately reverse course and divert to the airfield at Chengdu for an emergency landing. An incident like this grows more dangerous the deeper it occurs in the plateau, due to the distance from any airports to divert to, which might result in prolonged periods of time without oxygen in the air. This brings us to the second issue on why aircraft don't fly over Tibet. There isn't really much of a demand because no one truly lives there. Because they don't want to run the chance of experiencing an emergency situation while flying over it, long-haul international aircraft between Europe and Asia avoid flying over Tibet. However, because there are so few passengers, there aren't many shorter domestic flights either. In spite of occupying about 13% of China's total land area, the population of the Tibet Autonomous Territory in China is only slightly more than 3 million people, or 0.2% of China's total population. Bad turbulence and the potential for jet fuel freezing are the next two reasons why long-haul flights steer clear of flying over Tibet. Fast winds frequently adopt a wave-like pattern that looks like this as they span the plateau and mountains, greatly complicating any situation, and when aircraft fly through this wind pattern, the turbulence can get quite bumpy. Crisis situations. And lastly, there's the issue of jet fuel. According to theory, jet fuel freezes about minus 40 degrees Celsius, and while extremely cold situations such things hardly ever occur anywhere jets fly, it's possible for the air temperatures above the already extremely high and cold Tibetan Plateau to reach that level or much lower. For a brief flight through, this isn't really a concern. However, on longer flights across the plateau, which may last for 6 hours or longer, this can ultimately become a really serious problem. In order to reach their destinations, airplanes nearly always avoid flying over the Tibetan Plateau. This isn't due to some kind of mystical curse or anything of the sort, rather, it's due to the simple fact that if they had an emergency while flying across, it might be the most hazardous location among all the inhabited continents of the world. It serves as a reminder that even though our globe may appear little, linked, safe, and advanced, there are still some wild, distant locations where it is unsafe for us to travel.
Thank you for watching. If you like the video, don't forget to share and click on the notification button for more of our amazing videos.